This episode is brought to you in part by MixFlip, the ultimate portfolio player for mixing and mastering engineers. Learn more at mixflip.io and use the promo code MYM to save $5 off your first paid month. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. I'm Mike and Navina. Today, my guest is Robert L. Smith, not to be confused with Robert Smith of The Cure. So if you're a Cure fan listening to this thinking that it's about The Cure, turn away, unless you like audio engineering. But today, I'm chatting with Robert Smith, and if you're not familiar with him, he is an engineer based out of New York. He has worked with a ton of big artists, including David Bowie, Lady Gaga, Aerosmith. He's worked on TV shows such as Glee, and he also runs his own production company called Defy Recordings. And in today's conversation, we have a great chat, mainly centered around the idea of preparation and having a consistent way of working on every session that you do. And we dive into this idea of consistency, covering everything from even before the person is a client of yours, like what you're doing to get that client and to let them know what the expectations are of working with you. And then how to prepare for recording and what you do before the client even comes through the door. Then what you're doing in recording and mixing and everything in between. Robert is very thorough with his process, and he has stuck to the same process for almost 40 years now. And it's a big reason why he gets to work efficiently. And this is a really important topic to talk about because, as you'll hear in the interview, like one of my first questions has to deal with the fact that Robert in the past has been pretty outspoken about how to have success, he's had to work super late hours, long hours all the time, not eat well, not sleep well. And that kind of stuff can catch up to you. And I think for a lot of people listening to this, if you hear that kind of advice, it can be a little scary at first. It could be very overwhelming, and it might make you not want to get into this industry. But what you'll find interesting is the way Robert has approached this and how he's completely changed his mindset on this. And it has to do with a lot of the things that he talks about in this interview as far as preparation and being organized and having a workflow and all that kind of stuff. So if you're someone who is listening to this and you feel like mixing or production in general just takes forever to do and it seems very overwhelming and hard to do and maybe unmanageable as far as navigating work-life balance, I think you're going to find this episode really fascinating and you're going to take away a lot of really great information. So with that said, let's just jump right into it. Robert Smith, thank you so much for being on the Master Mix podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. For people who might not be familiar with you and who you are, what you do, and ultimately like your story, can you give us that background?
Sure. I'm a producer and engineer based in New York City. I have a company called Defy Recordings, and I am in my 39th year of making records professionally.
That's amazing.
And I came up in the tape days with all the big studios and all the major label projects. And here we are, and I'm still here, still making records.
That's amazing. So what ultimately got you into music production in the first place? Were you a musician just trying to do it for yourself, or like what did that look like?
I started out very young. I started out with a tiny reel-to-reel recorder and a pair of microphones when I was 11.
Oh, wow. So you were very young.
Yeah. And just started recording. And then my next door neighbors started a band when I was in my teens. So I was like helping them. And the first session I ever went to was with them in some basement, probably like a little Tascam reel to reel. And, took notes, which I still have from that session of like, what is this world? Because this is well before the internet. There's no resources. There's no information. So it's like you were just so desperate to grab anything you could. There were like 2 books in the library about all this stuff, and I read them, many, many times. So it was, starting like almost like prehistoric days, by comparison today. I just kept going and started doing live sound. And then I was a DJ, played bass for a minute with 2 friends of mine. We had a little trio. But I felt I was more of a bass owner than a bass player. So once I discovered recording, I was like, all right, I'm going to be on the other side of this glass. That's where I belong. And I moved to New York City from upstate New York in the mid 80s. And went to a little tech school in Greenwich Village called the Institute of Audio Research. And it was like a 9-month program, like not like a degree or anything, just like a certificate. But it wasn't that helpful because it was more about like how to build a console than like actually run one. And luckily I got a job in a studio before I was done with school, and I've been at it ever since.
That's amazing. So yeah, it sounds like you really like built your chops just by being in the studio and
I
doing
was
all that
in there
traveling.
the entire time.
Yeah. I'm sure learning how to build a console though could be a pretty eye-opening experience in terms of understanding like the little nitty-gritty bits of what makes
Perhaps,
stuff
yeah.
sounds good, right?
Yeah. But at the time, that I definitely wasn't interested in that. So it was just like, oh, I want to, I want to make the record, so that's what I want to do. So,
Yeah, it sounds like you were definitely like very streamlined, focused on getting a role as an engineer, like even from
absolutely,
11. Yeah.
absolutely, going back to the lack of resources, the one of the main resources we had was the back of album covers, where you'd see these album credits and say, okay, well, what is a producer? What is an engineer? What is a guitar tech? What's a assistant engineer? What are these things? But that's how you learned who the people were, and I am beyond thrilled that I got to know a lot of those people that I idolized, and who I ultimately ended up learning from. Because I came up in what was then called the apprentice system, which was you would work in a studio, you'd be like the low man on the totem pole, starting bottom of the ladder kind of thing. And you'd work your way up, by, getting coffee, cleaning toilets and cleaning the live room. And eventually you'd get in the room and in the sessions, and you just had to work your way up. And then the more they trusted you, the faster your ascent up that ladder was. And and that's how and one of the biggest things that you learned more than the technical thing was studio etiquette. Like, you learned what the roles were. And that was, that's something that like nobody really talks about, but that's why you were allowed to be in the room. If you knew how to behave, you would, they'd let you stay in there. If you didn't, you'd get kicked out. Just knowing how to hang in these situations was everything. And I've seen people get, kicked out or fired because they didn't know that. Or, they came in and they were like, oh, well, I know everything. And, and it's just like, yeah, that nobody wants that. And those are the ones that got kicked out very early and were sort of astounded because they'd be like, well, wait a minute. I mean, I know everything. So why am I not in there? Why is the guy sitting in the corner who's being quiet? Why is he allowed in there? And I'm not, and it's a tough lesson, but it's like, yeah, that's not what this gig is, man. Nobody wants to know your opinions when you walk in. If you're again the low man on the ladder there, it's like, no, that's not your place at all.
Yeah, I remember chatting with Andrew Sheps, and he said a very similar thing. He was like,
Yep.
he's like, in studios, like understanding the gear and how to run things is like a prerequisite. Like you need to know that stuff, but like the stuff that keeps you there is the stuff that like is the interpersonal conversations and communication and just like the etiquette and everything you just said there. That's what really matters.
Oh, yeah, to this day, and I mentor a lot of young people, and that's one of the first things they learn, and they echo it back to me, when they end up moving on with their own career. It's like, yeah, that ended up being one of the most important things that like I said, got me in the room and allowed me to stay there and actually grow my career and let it, make it flourish. So
yeah, you're working your way up and learning along the way, and you just gotta respect the process, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, because there is a very real process there.
Yeah, of course. Well, I read an article that you did a while ago with Sound Radix, and you were talking in that article about just getting into the industry. And one of the things that you said about yourself was that you're an all-in kind of engineer. And I think by that you meant that you're just like, you're so heavily, like your life is engineering.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that you mentioned in that article was the idea that the topic of work-life balance. And I think in that article you were quoted as saying that you don't sleep a lot, you don't eat a lot, and just long work days are part of the job, that kind of thing. And I know that especially in that system that you grew up in as like the getting to be the assistant and all that stuff, like you have to pay your dues and you have to do those long hours and that kind of stuff. But do you still feel like even today, now that you're in it like almost 40 years, like do you feel like you're still like that is still the way that you live your life?
No. And that's a great question because, it since that article, things have evolved. And luckily I have evolved a little bit as well in that, because I've been in it this long, whereas back then it was like, I literally was doing I did 100 hours a week for like 10 years. so yeah, you have no life. You go to sleep for like 2 or 3 hours and you come back and you do it all again. And but yeah, luckily, those days are long gone. But also too, one of the reasons why they're long gone is because back then there were no home studios. So if somebody was making a record, they were making a record in those rooms with you for months or sometimes years. So, there was no like, oh, I'll just go home and do the edits, give me the files on a hard drive. It was like, these are the master tapes. This is where the sessions happen. And, so that was the biggest difference with that. But also too, there are people that still, even if they, work out of their own home studio, that, they're still going to put in those crazy hours. But, part of my evolution was that, work smarter, not harder. I concept, of like, because I've been doing it for so long, some tasks that used to take me forever are lightning quick by comparison because it's like, all right, well, where it's like, okay, I could spend a couple hours on a rough mix or I could spend 20 minutes on a rough mix and it's going to be pretty damn good, because it's like, I already know what I'm going to do and I'm just going to get the balance, get everything where it needs to be. And we're good. That's all it needs to be right now. I'm not doing those crazy hours anymore. And a big split with my time is sort of like, to sound completely lame, it's in sales, in sales of this gig, meaning that I spend so much time during the day talking about projects, planning projects, helping people, plan, figure out what they, should they make a record? Should they just do a single? Are they ready? Should they consider vocal lessons? So there's a ton of conversation going on. So as opposed to me, strapped to my workstation all day and, doing mix moves all day, it's like, that's some days it's like that, but more often than not, that's only part of my day, which has been, taken me a little while to get comfortable with. But at this point, because I've been doing it for so long, I am, to many people, I am a resource. And that's actually what this entire week has been for me. I'm working with a new artist who I'm developing, and and they've been in the industry a long time, but they never found their place. And I've helped them find their place, and help bring them some peace. Strangely enough, because they finally found a musical home to get the work done and be who they want to be as an artist. So career development, it's like, and again, they're leaning on me because of my experience and who I know and what I've done and the success I've had, and that's pretty gratifying, knowing that like, all that work amounted to something, where it's like, wow, I can actually like help this person. I can save this person some agony and, and maybe save them from making some really bad decisions because I've literally seen it all before. And, if they're smart, they're going to listen to everything I say in that respect. Cause it's not coming from ego at all. It's just more for like, I just want to save you from some of the crap I had to go through. What's the point of all of this experience, right? If you can't help somebody, bypass some of those stupid moves you did when you were young and starting out.
Of course. Well, I think it goes back to like what you said earlier about that work smarter, not harder. Like,
Yeah.
you're essentially making the session work a lot easier by informing these artists about all these things that they need to know about ahead of time so that when they come in, it's more prepared, you're working more efficiently, all that kind of stuff. So that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and also too, it's like, a big part of that, it's sort of like a running joke from these last few years. I feel like I need to make a new business card that says my name and the title Manager of Expectations, because that's what I've really become, in that it's like, okay, so tell me what you want, tell me what you have to work with, and I will tell you what to expect. Because so often the three things aren't glued to reality whatsoever. So I'm like, I'm going to tell you I'm going to tell you straight, so when you're coming to me and you want your track to sound like a Rihanna production and you tell me you have $400, I'm going to tell you what that's going to sound like.
Fair.
You know what I mean? 'Cause, but
Yeah.
that's where we are with this in a lot of cases, as much as the internet's been really helpful as a resource and, informing and educating, man, there's a lot of misinformation out there and just nonsense that I feel for those that have to rely on them as their primary source of information, because there's so much you have to weed through. And who do you trust? It's like, it's rough. It can be rough out there.
Of course. Well, you mentioned that your life has shifted from doing all those intense hours and all that kind of stuff because of the fact that you've learned to work smarter, not harder.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that's something that just comes from experience, or are there certain tools and stuff like that you're using to actually make your life easier?
Experience. Yeah. No tools at all on that side of it.
So then do you think that anyone who's getting into the industry needs to come up a similar way that you did, where it is just like being all in and doing those intense hours just to get kind of the experience?
Probably to a degree, at least when you're like really starting out, and I'm addressing this to the person who bought the software, bought the microphone, and they recorded something and it sounds like crap and they don't know why. Those are the ones that need to put the time in to figure it out. It's like, make your mistakes, ask questions, find a couple people that really seem to have a clue, and seek out those that make the records that you love, because at this point, we're all reachable in some respects. So, it's not like the old days where it's like, oh, well, you need my manager's phone number and, they got to vet you before it gets to me. And, it's like, it's not really like that anymore. It's like, social media really changed all that. So, in good ways and bad ways. But if you, approach someone sanely and not like just some crazed maniac who's just expects to get a reply back from someone every 12 seconds, but if you just be cool about it, again, it's all about the hang. It's no different. I like to refer to social media as the virtual hallway in that regard, because when I worked in the big studios, I would get so many jobs just walking to the bathroom, because I'd excuse myself from the control room. I'd be walking down the hallway and I'd bump into somebody on the way to the bathroom. He'd be like, hey, are you around later? I need to do a vocal, that would happen all the time. So, but since we don't have that anymore, it's like, virtual hallway with social media and all that. So.
I love that. Yeah. But I agree. And I don't think that people need to necessarily reach out to people that are like miles ahead of them as far as skills. Like sometimes, like one of my mentors used to always say to me, like, to a second grader or a third grader is a genius. Like they know more than you know, so there's something you can learn from them. And it's the same sort of concept, where if you can just find people who understand what you want to do and can pass you on to that next level, or get you to that next level, then from there you can go to the next level and just keep working your way up, right? You don't need to shoot for like the finish line right away.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. So, one of my proudest moments as a mentor is I've one of my mentees is a film composer. She's amazing, and you're gonna hear her name in major films within 2 years, because she's just doing that kind of work. And she's been sitting in with me on my sessions for, almost 3 years now. She has seen everything from a metal band to a jazz album to an ambient album to, Lion King and the Broadway and a full-on old school commercial, for some medical company in Florida. So she's really seen every side. And so she went to, over last summer, she went to a composer's, class or something in Europe. And, a big part of it was you would write something as a composer, and then you'd have an orchestra right there record it. And I was very psyched to have her do that. And when she came back, I had this one burning question that I was like, I had this question in my mind for like 2 weeks, and I was just like, and all it was like, you were ready, right? And she's like, absolutely. Meaning that here she was in the studio, in the control room with the orchestra, whereas everyone else was kind of like, some had some experience. She owned it. She knew everything. She knew the flow, the etiquette, what everyone's role was. And I was like, yes, that's what I instilled in you, you know?
Love that.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was a proud moment for me, for sure.
I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah, especially with women, because when women, as we know in this industry, are almost non-existent. So I do everything I can to change that at some small level.
Hey, real quick, just want to take a second to tell you all about our awesome podcast sponsor, MixFlip. If you are a mixing or mastering engineer looking to stand out, you need MixFlip, the interactive portfolio player that's built to help you get more clients. With MixFlip, visitors can flip between a rough mix and your final mix or master in real time, allowing them to hear the transformation that you bring to the projects you work on. Plus, create traditional lossless players and mobile optimized landing pages that are perfect for your social bio. Start winning more clients for free today at mixflip.io. And when you're ready to upgrade, use promo code MYM to save $5 on a premium plan. Well, over the course of your career, I mean, you've worn a lot of different hats over the years. Like, you've been the producer, the engineer, the mixer, the master, that kind of thing. And sometimes all of the above in a session. And so I'm curious to know, like, when you're engineering, for example, like, how do you feel like the role differs between, like, all of those different stages and what you do in each project? Like, if you're just engineering a project, for example, and not mixing or mastering, like, do you feel like you change the way you work as far as maybe like things like commitment and...
Yes. Not much, but it's more, because I mean, when I'm producing a record, the mix starts with my mic choices. Before I'm even in, I'm like writing my setup sheet, that I'm going to give to the assistant in the studio. I'm deciding on my guitar tones and my drum sounds, on that piece of paper. And then when I'm recording, I am of the school of, I put all my faders at unity gain, and I set all my pre's, the mic pre levels are my mix, with the idea of I could come back at any time and put all my faders at unity gain, and my balance is going to be there fairly closely. I'm not going to, there's not going to be any chasing faders or anything like that. So it starts at that level.
Interesting. Yeah, I've only ever heard of the unity gain and like relying on the preamp settings, like more in the live world than anything, because a lot of people don't want to touch the faders for that. But it's interesting that you're approaching that in the studio world as well, and not just like try to maximize your volume and all that.
Yeah, well, I mean, normally I do a lot of like live tracking, with anything from a duo to an 80-piece orchestra, and everyone that does this, whether it's recording or mixing, has a system. They have a way of doing things that they do every time, because it's the way to get consistently good work. Because the last thing you want to do, you don't when you're in that hot seat of a big recording date, you want no questions happening. You just want everything to be there and set, and you're not chasing anything. You're not figuring out anything. You're not like questioning, is that really the microphone to use on that? It's like, I don't, you want all that stuff just taken care of. Because like, I think one of my pet peeves is starting a recording date sweaty.
I like how you put that. That's a great way of explaining it. Yeah.
To the point where, like, if I'm, and I came up in studios that, we had like a part of that hierarchy where, the production assistants were the ones that would, bring all the instruments into the room, bring in all your mic choices, maybe set up mic stands, something like that. So when I did not have that system in place and it was just me, I still needed that idea to happen. So what that would mean is I would be there the night before setting up. And generally, it would take me about 4 hours on my own. And the reason why I did that is because I could take my time. I could and make sure everything, I could test every line so that when they came in the next day, I mean, I just make sure everyone has their headphones. Everyone's happy with their headphone mixes. But for the most part, my levels are already dialed in, and I actually had a really, really cool way of doing that on my own. Again, because coming up from that system where I'd have people that could check the signals, check, 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 I had no one to do that. So what I did is I had a boom box, and it started out with the drum set, and it was incredible how well this worked. So I would put I'd put a boom box on the drum throne, and I'd just like play a CD. I think for this whole test, I would play like the same song. So I would put the boom box on the drum throne, hit play. I'd set it for like, some nominal level, and I would open up all my drum mics, and by my meters, I would dial in my drum levels. So they were all roughly, it almost looked like, almost like pink noise, like all the levels would be like relatively the same. And I would do that with every instrument. I would plug the boom box into my bass DI. Or my synth DI. I would put the boom box on, on the, where the music stand and the piano is for my piano mics. I do that with everything. And that what that meant was that every sound, every signal was checked and tested. There were no funky cables. There was no single-ended weird, like, loose solder joints. So that when everybody came in, and even if it was a 15-piece band and me to run it, I wouldn't be sweating because everything was already set. And it made it for such a million times better day. And I'd rather have done that 4 hours the night before and even gotten an hour's worth of sleep rather than, a full night's sleep and come in that morning and just run around like a maniac. Because there'd always be something broken or something missing, and you're running around like a crazy person. And the last thing I want to do, especially if it's a new client, is they're coming in and I'm like, yeah, how are you? And I'm like, I got cables on my shoulders and and I'm like covered in duct tape, stuff like that. It's just like, yeah, no. I want to be a calm business owner when they arrive.
Yeah. That's the etiquette thing you just talked about.
It's everything. Because when you do that, it instantly makes the client calm. Because if they come in and you're a nervous mess, they're not going to be comfortable. Their back's going to be up a little bit and be like, oh, what did I just agree to here? What did I walk into?
Of course. Yeah. No, it's exactly what you talked about. It's the etiquette thing. You're just coming in, you're presenting yourself in the best way possible.
Yeah.
And panic hits a lot harder when you're in the middle of a session with people around you than when you're on your own and you got all the time in the world.
Oh man, it's brutal. It's like, you get all edgy, you get snippy with people, and it's just like, can't happen at all. Because they won't come back. But conversely, if they come in and they love it and it sounds amazing, all those players that might come back on their own with their own project because they're like, this was an amazing experience. Why wouldn't I come back for this?
Of course. Yeah. I think one of my most favorite tools that I ever bought was a cable tester.
Yeah.
Just testing out every cable before the session just to make sure that nothing was dead, because there's nothing more freaky than like you think you have it all plugged in and everything is working and all of a sudden something stops.
Always. Yep. And it's just like, oh God. But yeah, you're even just the stupid stuff where it's just like, I need a 9-volt. Where's a 9-volt?
Of course.
God. Yeah. No, that's the worst.
Yeah. So then going back to that question about like, you wearing all sorts of different hats, how do you feel like your role changes when you're doing like just one of the parts of the process versus, being there from the beginning? Obviously, if you're there from the beginning, like you said, you're gain staging everything with the mix in mind. But if you're working just, let's say you're just engineering a session that someone else is going to mix, does that really change like how you're approaching it for that next person in line?
Not really. I'm always one to commit, like I'm a huge compressor head. I don't even use EQ when I'm recording. I just have compressors on everything, but not for dynamic control per se. It's more for tone color than anything. I'm not, you don't ever see me, there's not, the most gain reduction you'd see is maybe 2 dB on like a snare hit, something like that. I'm not killing anything because I learned that that's not it just doesn't sound good. So my approach like that is like, because I was able to like assist guys like Al Schmidt and Bruce Sweeney and, the masters, where it's just like, oh, okay. Because, when you start out, you think that there's this weird ratio where you think the more knobs you turn, the better it will sound. But what you learn is that like the less you turn knobs, the better it will sound. And it takes you a while to figure that out.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So it was like, so my approach has always been much more minimal compared to, some other engineers. So that makes my recordings a little more universal, meaning that whoever gets them, there'll be plenty of, it'll sound great and there'll be plenty of room for them to do whatever they want. Because I'm not EQing it. It's like, well, you can EQ the snot out of it if you need to. But so it's like, yeah, I'm committing, but I'm nothing's like, so no sound is so like far gone that a later engineer would be like, I can't use this. This is, what is this? So,
of course.
So yeah. So it's, I mean, because that's the way I came up, because, when you first are coming up in that apprentice system, you're not mixing anything, you're recording everything, but no one's trusting you with a mix yet. So,
Gotcha.
so you really get to hone your recording chops and just learn how to make great recordings. So whoever gets them later on will love what you did because it's perfect and they can do exactly what they need from it.
So to maybe tie into that question then a bit, one song that you worked on that I love the production of this track was Aerosmith's "Don't Want to Miss a Thing."
Yeah, of course.
And you engineered that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So one of the things that I love about that track is just how big it sounds. Like it's just like this epic sound, and part of that's the arrangement of everything. But also, I feel like when I listen to that track a little bit closer, like to me, what kind of catches my attention is that it seems like all of the different instruments kind of have their own ambience, and that all of these different flavors of ambience are coming together to make it what it is. It's not just like everything being sent to one reverb and, there's that like uniform sound to it. And so I'm curious to know, like, with your role as an engineer on that project, was there any discussion going into that song about, this is kind of what we're hoping for, this is kind of the ambience we want to capture, or was that something that was left more for the mix?
That was more for the mix. But to that end, there is no discussion when at that level and you're brought in as the engineer, because you are there because they know your track record and they know what your skill level is. So there isn't actually, there are no conversations about what needs to be done, because it's all just like, I'm there because they know I can do the gig, so they're not asking me about like what mic I'm using, what EQ I'm using. There's none of that. It's all about, me bringing up those faders on the desk and everything sounding like a record right from the start. That's it. That's what it, once that's established, we're good to go and we're just rolling takes. But as you can imagine, that takes a lot of experience to get to that point. And I think one of the high points of my career was I got to record Placido Domingo, the opera singer, who's like legendary singer. And it was a very similar thing where they hired me to record him. I'd never met him. I'd never recorded him. I set up the mic and I dialed in my levels before he even got there. And he came in and he, with something like that, everyone calls him maestro. And it's, pretty much as the highest level you can imagine, right? He's this legendary opera singer. They're not going to, everyone that's in there is the best there is, right? So I think one of the best things I ever did as an engineer is when he went to sing, he stepped to the mic, I hit record, and he sang. And, he did like a couple takes just because we were there. And that was it. There was no discussion. There was no like check, test, bubble. There wasn't a question about the mic choice, the tone, nothing. Because it's what they knew and what they expected. So the fact that me not knowing them at all, but knowing what it had to be is everything.
Mm.
You know what I mean? I mean, if you think about that, it sounds silly, but it's like there wasn't a question about the sound quality. It was just again, even opera, it was just a hang. Pleasure to meet you, sir, and couple jokes back and forth, blah blah blah. He was in and he was out and he was gone. Boom.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you're removing the technical process from the equation.
Completely. Yep, that's always the goal. And I always say to people coming up, artists, I'm like, if you're worried about what's going on with all the knobs, you're thinking about the wrong thing, or if you're concerned about that, you don't have the right engineer, because if it's the right engineer, you don't even have to say anything. I mean, to that end, I've been working with this lovely singer-songwriter. She's still a student, but she's amazing. And she comes in and she just sings and plays guitar live. She's like plays finger picking style. And the first time I delivered mixes to her, she was like, "Oh my God, I love them." And she's like, "Wait, I didn't even tell you what I wanted." and I was like, "I know it. I know exactly what you wanted. You don't have to tell me anything." Yep. And this is her first experience. I'm like, it won't be like this every time, but that's when you're with the right person. Because it's like, from the second I heard her, I knew exactly what it was going to sound like on the record.
Yeah.
And so it was just funny because just the way she said it, you could tell it was probably from like conversations with other friends that are musicians where they're like, I had to tell them what to do. And she didn't have to tell me anything. It was like the reverb choice was right. The tones were right, all that stuff. And it's like, that's what it is about. And that's what all this experience gets me.
Yeah, that experience definitely is something like, I think to myself about like my experience just as a live sound engineer for a long time doing monitors. Mm-hmm. To me, that was like one of the most important lessons as far as like when I was in the studio, how to set up headphone amps or how to headphone mixes, like you learn exactly like what the drummer wants to hear versus the singer versus the guitar player. And like, the faster you can dial those things in for everyone, the smoother the session goes.
Oh God, it's everything. Because we've been around those sessions where the balances weren't right and everyone's like edgy and pissed off, and if you ever want to destroy a session, tell the singer that they have to share the same headphone mix as the drummer. They'll just leave. They'll just be like, that will be impossible.
Yeah, I hope you like your click blasting in your ears.
It won't happen. Won't work.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It's all about that headphone mix. All about it. And even today, to that point, it's like similar thing here. It's like at my own studio where it's like, because I'm always astounded how crappy the headphone mix sounds, even at the best studios in the world. They'll have the Evian, or whatever boxes. I'm always shocked at how terrible in general those headphones sound. So here, the one, when I set it up, it just sounds like a record. It's, and I've never had anyone be like, no, it's like, they're always just like, pleased, it's like, oh, okay. It's no different than them putting in their AirPods and listening to, an album on Spotify or something like that, where, they're not, concerned about the sound. They're just listening to the music. And that's what I do here.
Yeah, of course. I've always found that too with like those headphone systems where people can dial in their own mix. It's like most people don't know what they want or like how to do it. So if you leave it up to them, they're going to mess it up. But so like you're way better off going in ahead of time and setting up the mix the way you listen to it, what they're hearing, and there's no question as the, did they dial in the actual mix that they need or not?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know that's, we've had them now for ages. And there are some pluses to it, but I still miss dialing in my monitor, my headphone mixes on a console. It was just better. It was better in a lot of ways. So they're out of like, let's say if it was like a 6-piece band, there's always that one guy that's never going to be happy, but everyone else would be happy the whole time. Those headphone systems drive me crazy is when we're done with the basic tracks and now we need to do some overdubs. But that means the whole headphone thing's going to change, and it's just like, oh God, that was just so much easier on a console where I could, quickly just adjust it on the fly.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, another project that I was curious to ask about was that you got to work on the TV show Glee and do some work for them. And I was curious to know what that experience was like, because I imagine that working on a cappella music is very different than working on rock music.
Oh, man. Yeah. No. Well, the hilarious part about that project is I turned them down 5 times. They kept wanting to hire me. And at that point, if you remember that show at all, the aesthetic of the music was like hyper processed, like completely devoid of reality, like tuned to death. And it was all of that was Melodyne. And at the time I did not know Melodyne. So so every time I turn them down, it's like, I don't know the program, so like, I'm not the guy. And then finally I just gave up. And when we did it, I had the assistant who knew Melodyne, kind of, he's the one that kind of got me into the concept. I had known Autotune, but not to the depth of like, that we use Melodyne now these days. So I basically learned Melodyne on Glee's dime, which ended up, the first song we did ended up being a #1 single. We did a cover of Katy Perry's Teenage Dream, and it was 127 tracks of vocals.
Wow.
And, and there was one guy that kind of like sang the drum part, and there was another guy that, sang the bass part and all that kind of stuff. And it was insane. It was just the level of detail was beyond.
So how do you go into mixing a song like that? Like because obviously like the voice is going to sound different than a drum set. If someone's beatboxing, it's going to be a different way of approaching it, I would think, or maybe it is the same.
It's actually not really different than what I described before. I put all my faders at unity gain. It's just that the instrument is a kid, in front of a microphone instead of a drum or an amplifier, and you just build it that way.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a very bizarre experience, and yeah, I think that was like it was the first #1 single I'd had in a long time, and it was right at the time when there was still the iTunes store, and I remember watching the show, and once it came on, I saw the single jump up on iTunes, and I think it was like within the top 10. But then when it showed in LA, with the time difference, that's when it went to #1. And it was kind of surreal to just like watch it, like, I'm like watching the TV, and then it's like, up, and here it goes. And it was a fascinating experience.
That's very, very cool. Yeah, I imagine that it would be very interesting to work on something like that because it's unique.
Oh, completely. But to that end, my mentors had always told me that I never believed, like, whether you get an award, whether you win a Grammy or get a #1 thing, it does not get you work. And it's like, you're thinking like, how is that possible? I learned that. It was like, so with Glee, I think we did 6 singles. We had a #1. Then the second one was a #3. Then it was like a #5 and #6. Just like we just like lined them right up. After that, my phone didn't ring for a year.
Yep, I've heard that story many times from people.
And it was like, and you try and take it as a learning moment, right? And it's like, okay, well, especially because it was so unique, the thing that was silly about it is, okay, I just had a #1 single with an a cappella song, an a cappella cover song. So what that meant for those people that would have called me previously, it's like, oh, well, we're not an a cappella song, so he's not going to be the guy for that. So we're not going to call him because of that. We're not going to call him because, of course, his rates are higher. We can't afford him. And, and of course, everyone's calling him, so he's not available. And that's what everyone thought. So my phone did not ring for a year.
I never thought of it that way, but that makes a lot of sense, especially for like a pretty niche style of music like that. I can see how people would associate that.
Because no one, because you've been in the industry, you know how this works, where like people think if you get known for like one thing, that's all you've ever done. Like that, it's like, I mean, thank God that didn't stay with me where it's just like, oh yeah, no, I'm only the a cappella cover song guy. You know what I mean? I've been doomed. But it's like, if somebody has a hit producing a metal album, it's like, actually to that end, one of the funniest sessions I've ever done, speaking of metal, was I worked with Bob Rock one time with Michael Bublé and Miss Piggy doing a duet of Baby It's Cold Outside for a Christmas album. I mean, there it is, right?
Talk about a world of differences.
I mean, but it was an amazing moment. It's like, wow, I've recorded Miss Piggy. I had already worked with Michael before, but I'd never worked with Bob before. So it was like, there's your mashup right there. It's like,
yeah. I love that.
So crazy. So yeah, that's like the perfect illustration of it.
That's amazing. Well, as far as like your mixing workflow goes, you mentioned earlier that that's like such an important thing for you, is to have that consistency in the way that you work on every project. And you talked about how one of the very first things that you do is you focus on getting your levels and setting up your faders. But beyond that, like, it seems like you probably have a pretty well-defined process for mixing, I would assume, beyond the fader. So is there like a specific order of things that you tend to stick to, or what does that look like for you?
Well, the first thing I need to mention about that is organization. In that I have organized my sessions the exact same for decades now. And the importance of that is that I can open a session from 14 years ago and not remember nothing from it. And just looking at the session, I know exactly what I did even 14 years later, because it's still exactly the same. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a couple plugin choices that aren't there anymore, but like as far as colors, where things are, the labeling, as far as like all lowercase or all uppercase, it's like I can tell exactly, and to that point, I don't even have to be looking at at the session. I can, like, if I see what my mix was, if it was written a certain way, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I mixed that one hybrid. It's like if it's written this other way, oh, that one I mixed in the box. I don't even have to look at the session to even know that. But it's that consistency is massive, because I have an archive of all my sessions, and you'd be surprised at how often I have to access that thing. I mean, in the past week and a half, I've accessed it like 4 times. It's off site. I have to go somewhere to get the files. But yeah, it's like, I have people, like one of them was this album I mastered for vinyl, where it's like, I think I did it in 2014. And they're like, hey, any chance you still have the vinyl masters from our 2 EPs? Yeah, of course. I look in the database. Okay, oh, they're there. Okay, great. Let me go get me. And that's, so that being organized is everything. So yeah, that's the first thing. And then when I'm mixing something, if it's a song with a vocal, I always start with the vocal first. I get my levels, I do my effects, I do my delay throws, I do all of it before I even put anything else in. And then I put in the drums.
Interesting. So you're listening to vocal just in isolation at that point?
Just in isolation. Yep. And the reason I do it that way is because when I was an assistant coming up, I would see these guys, these like, big mega mixer guys, and they'd put up the kick drum fader, and we'd be there all day and night. And then, at midnight, they'd open up the lead vocal and wonder why there's no room in the mix to fit the vocal. And I saw that time and time and time again. But as we know, no one hums the bass drum part. Everyone is focusing on the lead vocal. So why not start with the most important thing in the song first? And when you do that, you eliminate the issue of it trying to fit in to everything else. So when the vocal is the size it needs to be, and then I have the drums with it, I'm going to get my balance between those perfectly. And then I put in the bass guitar. And at that point, it's almost like I was describing it to somebody and they told me it was almost like painting or something, like filling in the colors like one by one. It's like, yeah, it's I kind of view it in a way as a picture frame, whereas the drums are like the frame. And then the primary thing is in the middle of the picture is the vocal. And then I just fill in everything around that. And so when I'm putting that bass guitar in, you'd be surprised at how low I end up having that bass guitar channel in that way, because it takes up a ton of space. It's like, so rather than just like if I had drums and then bass and then put in the vocal, I already have a fight between the bass guitar and the vocal. But now because the vocal is established and that's like my point, my reference point, I fit the bass guitar around the vocal. And that's going to influence my EQ choices with it. I'm maybe going to take out some of that little bit of that 300 because there's a lot of that in this particular vocalist's voice. I'm going to fit it around the vocal. So it's going to be like the perfect glue between the drums and the vocal. And then, just do that, repeat that with everything.
Interesting. Yeah, that's actually really, like, it makes sense to me. Personally, I've just never worked that way. I've always done it the bass and drums and then vocals kind of way. Yep. Mm-hmm. And that's just, I think that's just how I was brought up, like learning from other people, right? But I do see exactly like the challenge of that, which is, when I get to the vocals and you start adding effects, you're like, oh, wait a minute, is this the right effect? Or like, do I have to change things now? Or now I got to re-EQ things? And like, it always becomes a little bit of a balance at that stage because you're trying to make it fit everything else.
Yeah. And doing it that way, I mix in half the time because there's no clashes, or I'm fine, I'm addressing every time I bring in the next instrument, I'm listening for the clashes. Like, oh, okay, that's doing that. Okay, boom, boom, boom. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm big into mono. I actually mix 80% of the time in mono on a little speaker, super quiet, like maybe 60 dB, maybe 50. There sometimes if I have someone in the room and they have their iPhone on, their clacking while they're texting is louder than I'm listening.
Wow.
Yep.
That's fascinating. Well, see, for me, like one of the reasons why I always did bass and drums as the first thing was because I felt that by doing that, you can really establish the overall frequency curve of the mix because you got your low end, you got your really transient energy. And for me, like the headroom thing was always the thing that I would focus on at that stage, like making sure that I had lots of headroom. So, and I've kind of like just learned to kind of identify where I want things to hit on the master when I'm setting those up. So as far as that goes, when it comes to vocals and mixing vocals only, like, are you doing a similar thing? Like, do you kind of just have an idea of where the vocal should be sitting on your master meter? Or does it even matter to you?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, because because I've been doing it for so long, everything's dialed in. And I'm, and I mix hybrid, I have like, API summing and I have, a bunch of Manley and Avalon stuff on my 2-bus. And I have, I really love Empirical Labs Fatsos. I have 3 of those across pairs of inserts. So and those settings on the outboard never changes. So I can open up a song from 10 years ago and the boxes are still set the same. so there's no recall weirdness. And the difference obviously is how I hit the boxes from the output of Pro Tools. It's like, oh, I want to hit that fatso more, so I'm going to cream that one, but the settings stay the same.
Mm-hmm. But I think that has to do with the fact that you are so consistent in the way that you work.
Yeah.
Because if you're always setting things up at a similar level, then all the compressors are going to react the same way, and they're going to there's that consistent element there, which makes your life a lot easier. You don't have to recreate the wheel every time, right?
Yeah. No, and it's so it's like they are all the colors I want, and I just it's very much like a palette, and I just grab as much of that as I want.
Yeah, that's very cool. So then at the end of the day, like, how do you know when you're done with the mix then?
goosebumps. And what I mean by that is like, for as long as I've been working on this song, if I can get goosebumps after all that time, I know I'm done.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I have a certain place. I'm very much the one, walking down the hall, walking down the other room, walking into another room and listening. That's always super informative as well. So I do all those like checks before I know it's done.
Mm-hmm.
But and it's interesting because I've always hear people like, I don't know if I'm done. And I never question it ever. I don't ever send it to somebody to like get their take on it. I just know. I guess because I've been doing it for so long.
But if you had to define like what ultimately brings those goosebumps on, like how would you define what a great mix entails?
Where there's that moment in the song where the singer like sang a particular word, a way that just stopped you in your tracks, and it's like, it's anything, whether a note in a guitar solo, a fill going, bass fill going into a chorus, or, some weird thing that the drummer did that you didn't expect, where it's just like, it just takes it, and it's just like, whoa, like, wow, that, again, after so many repeated listens, if that still gets me excited, I know it's going to excite anyone else because, here, if I'm listening to something for a week, that I've produced, overdubbed, recorded, mixed, and I can still jump up and down about it. I mean, the average listener is definitely they're going to feel a couple things for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Which is what we want. We want them to just stop in their tracks and, pull over their car and start crying.
That's what we want.
For the right reasons.
I love it. Well, Robert, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I'm just really grateful for you coming on here today and sharing all that advice. I think it's really important for people to hear about this consistency, about being so you coming into the studio, because I think those are things that people tend to overlook. And sometimes you need that reminder that that's what makes someone stand out as a professional. And that's what makes you work more efficiently. It's going to make, going back to the quality of or to the work-life balance thing, it's going to make your life more balanced, and you're going to have less time working and more time enjoying what you're doing. So all of this stuff, it really comes together for all of that. So I really appreciate all the advice that you shared here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. This is fun chat.
If people want to learn more about you and maybe even like potentially work with you, like what are the best ways for them to do that?
Find me online. I am everywhere as Defy Recordings, which is DEFYRECORDINGS. That's my website, defyrecordings.com, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and like 4 other things that I'm on that I don't recall at the moment. I'm everywhere that way. Which is one of the things with the name, because I can't use the generic name out there. So I just came with my company name, and that's the brand. That's everywhere.
Gotcha. So people don't confuse you with Robert Smith from The Cure.
Yep.
So, love it.
So yeah.
Well, again, Robert L. Smith, to clarify. Thank you for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. I really enjoyed our chat. So let's do it again sometime.
So that was my interview with Robert L. Smith. And I think that what he shared there about just having so much consistency in your workflow and how to prepare for every stage of the process, I think that's so important for people listening to this. Like, I really enjoyed how he framed it as you don't want to go into sessions sweaty. And I think that that's a great way of kind of visualizing the chaos that sometimes a session can bring. But when you have consistency in terms of how you prepare ahead of time, and you get into the studio before the client gets there, and then when the client's there, you're all set up with your levels, or even just how he sets his levels, or how he gain stages his sessions. With all of these things, by having a defined way of doing this in every single session, it really eliminates a lot of the panic, a lot of the stress, and it makes it so you can go into the work you're about to do
confidently, calmly, and just with a clear head so that you can ultimately focus on making the best music possible. And that's what this is all about. But if you're not prepared, if you're very inconsistent with your workflow, if you don't gain stage things properly or consistently, all of this stuff is just going to cause problems later on. It's going to make you work harder, not smarter, which is the opposite of what Robert talked about here today, right? So yeah, I think if you're going to take anything from this episode, it's that you need to have a defined way of working. You need to be prepared. And whether you're working with other clients or not, you still need to have this consistency in what you do. You still need to be prepared. You need to set yourself up for success. And maybe that's having templates or organizing your studio a certain way, or just discovering how you want to gain stage things consistently, or whatever it is. You just need that consistency in what you do. And when you do that, life becomes a lot easier, and you're going to get through sessions a lot faster, and you're ultimately going to get better results out of it as well. So yeah, I really, really appreciated what Robert had to share here today. And I hope that you take this information and implement it into your own process too, because I can guarantee that you will see better results because of it. Now, one of the things that Robert did talk about in this interview is the idea of having a mentor, someone who can teach you the system, because sometimes this stuff isn't very obvious to pick up on, right? Like, I know for myself that I had been recording music for like 7 or 8 years before I followed a mentor who was very consistent with this process, and I learned how he did it. And then I was able to adapt that to my own process as well. So there's a lot of power in having a mentor who can pass this kind of stuff on to you. Now, if you're struggling to find your workflow, if you're not sure of what tools to be using or what order you should be doing things in, what you should be listening for, how to set up your sessions for success, and ultimately how to get consistent results and get the sounds that you hear in your head to come out of your speakers every single time, if you're looking for help with that, that is exactly what I'd love to help you out with. And inside of my coaching program, Amplitude, that's exactly what I work with my students on. I give you my beginning to end repeatable process so that with every song you work on, you have that clarity. You know what to do next when you're done with your mix. And it becomes very easy to approach your productions with this overwhelming sense of feeling scattered. So if you want one-on-one help with your productions, if you want someone that can show you this beginning to end system and give you the clarity so that you know exactly what you're going to do to get the results that you want, then make sure to check out masteryourmix.com/amplitude. And on that page, you can find all the details about my program. It's a one-on-one program where I'll work with you personally to get those results. So yeah, go to that website, and on that page, you're going to find a button to click to get a demo of the program. It's going to basically ask you to do a little application. And if it seems like you'd be a good fit for this program, then I'd love to hop on a call with you, and I'd love to learn more about you and your processes to see if we can identify any of the gaps or how I can ultimately best help you. And if it seems like we are a good match for each other, then I would love to invite you into this program and work one-on-one with you to help you get your music feeling just as good as you always wanted. So once again, make sure to check out masteryourmix.com/amplitude, and you can find all the details there. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit MasterYourMix.com.